The air in Redemption Gulch, Arizona territory didn't just carry dust, it carried judgment. It was a fine, gritty powder that settled on everything from the brim of a good man's hat to the soul of a sinner. In the summer of 1881, that dust was thick with whispers. They were about me, Clara Winthrop, the doctor's daughter from Boston, with hands too clean and ideas too forward for this sun-scorched earth. But more than that, they were about him, the Apache they called the Giant, a man whose silence was louder than any gunshot and whose eyes held the memory of 1,000 desert sunsets. Our story wasn't one of cowboys and Indians. It was one of a chasm between worlds and the desperate, dangerous attempt to build a bridge. My arrival in Redemption Gulch was less a grand entrance and more a quiet surrender. I had fled the suffocating parlors of Boston society, where a woman's sharp mind was considered a sharper failing. My father, Dr. Alistair Winthrop, had brought his failing lungs and his headstrong daughter to this ragged edge of civilization, hoping the dry air would grant him a few more years. He set up a small practice, and I, his overeducated apprentice, became the town's unofficial nurse, midwife, and setter of bones. Redemption Gulch was a town held together by desperation and whiskey. It was lorded over by a man named Silas Kane, a rancher, whose vast holdings were matched only by his bottomless ambition. He had a politician's smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. From my first week, he made his intentions clear, calling on my father with gifts of beef and bottles of French wine, his gaze lingering on me with an unnerving sense of ownership. He saw me as another prize to be acquired, a polished piece of the East to adorn his Western empire. The townsfolk were wary of me. I read books, spoke my mind, and didn't flutter my eyelashes when a man tipped his hat. I was an oddity, but they needed my hands. I stitched up knife wounds for drunken prospectors, delivered babies in stifling one-room shacks, and set the leg of Sheriff Brody's own son after a fall from a hayloft. I earned a grudging respect, a currency more valuable than gold in that town. I first saw the man they called the Giant a month after my arrival. A freight wagon had overturned on the main street, crushing the driver's leg. As my father and I worked, a hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered. I looked up from the bloody mangle of denim and bone and saw him. He wasn't just tall, he was monumental. He stood a head and a shoulders above any man there, with a breadth of chest that strained the seams of his simple cotton shirt. His hair was long and black as a raven's wing, held back by a thin leather band, but it was his face that silenced the crowd. It was a mask of hard angles and weathered bronze, dominated by a jaw that could have been carved from the surrounding mesas. His eyes, dark and deep-set, missed nothing. He was Apache, that was plain to see, but he moved with a stillness that was entirely his own. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, yet he radiated a danger more potent than any holstered Colt. He said nothing. He simply watched, his gaze fixed on my hands as I cleaned the wound and prepared a splint. The other townsfolk gave him a wide berth, their fear and hatred a palpable thing in the oppressive heat. Silas Kane, who had been observing from the porch of his land office, stepped forward. "That's far enough, savage," Kane said, his voice dripping with casual contempt. The Apache's eyes flickered to Kane for a brief second, a glance so dismissive it was more insulting than any retort. Then his gaze returned to me. He held it for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face, before he turned and walked away, melting back into the shimmering heat haze at the edge of town, as silently as he had appeared. "Who was that?" I asked my father later, my voice quiet. "The locals call him Taza," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. It means giant in their tongue or something close to it. He's Chiricahua Apache, lives alone up in the dragoons. He comes to town for supplies now and then. Trades pelts. Never says a word, never causes a lick of trouble, but folks fear him all the same. My father paused, looking at me. Silas Kane lost a brother in an Apache raid years ago. He holds a special kind of hate for them. Steer clear of that man, Clara. Both of them. I tried to heed his advice, but Taza became a silent fixture in my new life. I'd see him at the edge of town, a solitary figure watching the world go by. Once I saw him at the general store trading a perfectly cured fox pelt with the owner Elias Schmidt. Taza didn't speak. He simply pointed at sacks of flour, coffee, and salt. The transaction was conducted in complete silence, a tense pantomime of commerce between two worlds. I noticed the way his hands moved, large, calloused, but with a surprising grace. My own world was shrinking under the shadow of Silas Kane. His visits became more frequent, his compliments more cloying. He spoke of his plans for the territory for the town, and implicitly for me. He promised a life of luxury and protection. A woman like you, he'd say, a delicate flower shouldn't be wrestling with this wasteland. You belong in a proper home. My home. His words felt like a gilded cage. He didn't see me. He saw a symbol. The more he pushed, the more I found my gaze drifting towards the distant mountains, where the silent Apache lived a man who represented everything Kane sought to crush freedom, wildness, an existence untethered to greed. I didn't know then that the weight of Taza's silence was nothing compared to the weight of the words he would one day speak. The summer deepened, baking the land until it cracked. The heat brought sickness. A wave of scarlet fever swept through the miners' camps and then into the town itself. It hit the children hardest. For 2 weeks, my father and I barely slept, moving from one grief-stricken home to another, our remedies, and cool cloths feeling like pitiful gestures against the disease's relentless march. We lost 3 children in town, including the baker's youngest daughter. The church bell tolled each clang, a leaden weight on the town's heart. One evening as I was leaving the Miller household, their little boy finally passed the crisis point. A figure blocked my path. It was a young Apache boy, no older than 10, his face streaked with dust and tears. He spoke in a rush of panicked Apache words, pointing frantically back towards the mountains. I couldn't understand him, but I understood the terror in his eyes. Before I could think, another shadow emerged from the twilight. It was Taza. He was no longer the silent observer. He moved with a purpose that was both swift and commanding. He stood before me, his sheer size blocking out the last of the dying sun. "My sister's son," he said. His voice. It was the first time I had heard it. It was a low baritone, a deep, resonant sound, like stones rolling in a riverbed. It held no accent I could place, just a careful, precise articulation of English that was startling in its clarity. He has the burning sickness. The shaman's prayers do no good. His mother. She is afraid. The townsfolk on the street had stopped watching. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of fear and suspicion. To them, I was crossing a line that was not meant to be crossed. Helping an Apache was one step shy of treason. I am a doctor's daughter, not a miracle worker. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I can try, but I make no promises. Trying is more than the spirits have offered, he replied. His gaze was intense, searching my face for something pity-revulsion, perhaps courage. I will pay. I don't want your money or your pelts, I said, meeting his eyes. I want you to understand that what I have may not be enough. He gave a single sharp nod. He turned to the boy and spoke a few soft words in their tongue, a sound of gentle reassurance. Then he looked back at me. "My horse is here. We must go now. The fever is high." I didn't hesitate. I ran back to my father's surgery, grabbing my medical bag, stuffing it with laudanum quinine and clean linens. My father stood in the doorway, his face etched with worry. "Clara, this is foolish," he whispered. "These people, they are not our people. If that child dies in your care—" "Then he dies," I cut in my voice sharp. "But if I don't go, he dies for certain. Isn't that what you taught me? That sickness knows no creed or color?" He sighed, the sound of a man who knew he had lost the argument the moment he had raised me to have a mind of her own. He handed me a small canteen. "Be careful, daughter." The ride into the Dragoon Mountains was terrifying and exhilarating. Taza rode a powerful buckskin stallion with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle. I rode behind him, my hands resting tentatively on his shoulders. The world of redemption, Gulch with its dusty streets and narrow mines, fell away behind us, replaced by a sprawling canvas of rock and cactus, bathed in the ethereal glow of a rising moon. We rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic beat of hooves and the whisper of the night wind. His people were hidden in a small, sheltered canyon, a place the earth itself seemed to be protecting. It was a small band, perhaps 30 souls in all. Their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight were masks of fear and distrust as I, the white woman, was led into their midst. The sick child was in a small wickiup, a brush shelter. His mother, a woman with eyes hollowed out by grief, looked at me with open hostility. But Taza spoke to her in their language, his tone firm but gentle, and she reluctantly stepped aside. The boy was burning. His skin was flush with the rash, his breathing ragged and shallow. I worked for hours, forcing sips of willow bark tea and water between his cracked lips, sponging his body with cool, damp cloths. Taza never left my side. He translated my instructions, held the boy's thrashing limbs, and watched my every move with an unnerving focus. In the quiet moments as the child slept fitfully, we spoke. I asked him about his perfect English. "A man of God found me after a raid," he said, his eyes fixed on the fire. "My family was gone. He took me to a mission in Santa Fe, taught me his words, his books. He wanted to save my soul." "And did he?" I asked softly. A flicker of a smile, sad and fleeting, touched his lips. "He showed me a new world. But my soul was never lost. It was waiting for me here in these mountains. I came back. The white man's world has many books, but no answers for a man like me." I learned his Apache name was Taza, but his mission name had been Joseph. He was a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He had read Shakespeare and the Bible, yet he knew the language of the hawk and the deer. He was a warrior, a leader to his small displaced band, and a scholar of a world that wanted him dead or assimilated. For 3 days and 3 nights, I stayed in that canyon. I battled the fever for the life of a child whose name I couldn't pronounce. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. The boy woke weak but lucid and asked for water. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the camp. His mother fell to her knees, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she clutched my hand. Taza walked with me to the edge of the canyon as the sun began its ascent, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. "You have a strong spirit, Clara Winthrop," he said, his voice low. "It is not a thing I have seen in your people." "And you have a gentle heart, Taza," I replied. "It is not what the people in town would have me believe." He looked out at the vast, wild expanse before us. They believe what they need to believe. It makes their world simple, black and white, good and evil. But the world is not simple. It is the color of this sky. 1,000 shades mix together, and you can never find where one begins and the other ends. As I prepared to leave, he pressed a small, intricately beaded pouch into my hand. For you. So you remember the people of the canyon. I won't forget. I promised. As I rode back towards Redemption Gulch, I knew something profound had shifted within me. I had gone into the mountains to fight a fever in a child's blood, but I had returned with a different kind of fever in my own. My return to Redemption Gulch was met with a chilling silence. The whispers that had followed me before now became a wall of open hostility. By saving an Apache child, I had betrayed my own kind. Elias Schmidt, the store owner, suddenly found his supply of bandages had run out. Martha Baker, whose baby I had delivered just months before, crossed the street to avoid me. The lines Taza had spoken of, black and white, good and evil, had been drawn in the dust, and I had defiantly stepped over them. Sheriff Brody, a man whose spine seemed to be on permanent loan to Silas Kane, paid my father a visit. He was polite, but his message was clear. "Folks are spooked, Doc," he'd said, twisting the brim of his hat. "They see Clara consorting with the savages. It stirs up bad memories. For their safety and hers, it might be best if she kept to the clinic." It was a warning dressed up as advice. Silas Kane, however, saw an opportunity. He arrived at our doorstep that evening, not with threats, but with a bouquet of desert wildflowers that looked garish and out of place in his meaty fist. "Clara," he began, his voice smooth as oiled leather, "you have a charitable heart. I admire that. But your heart is leading you into danger." He stepped inside his presence, filling our small parlor. "You need protection. This is a hard land, and it has no place for a woman alone, especially one who invites the wrong kind of attention." He set the flowers down and turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory sincerity. "Marry me. I can give you everything. A fine house, respect, security. The town will follow my lead. They will forget all about this foolishness with the Apache. I will make them." It was the devil's bargain. He was offering to quell the storm he himself was fanning. He would give me safety in exchange for my soul. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Kane," I said, my voice cold as a winter morning. "But I am not in need of a protector, and I am not for sale." A flicker of fury crossed his face before being replaced by his customary smirk. "A spirited woman. I like that. But spirit doesn't stop a bullet, Clara, or a rope. Think about my offer. It won't stand forever." He left, and the air in the room felt cleaner. But his threat lingered like the smell of sulfur. The pressure mounted. One of Kane's ranch hands, a brutish man named Frank, accidentally spooked my horse, nearly sending me tumbling into the street. A rock was thrown through our window one night, wrapped in a note that simply read, "Indian lover." My father's health took a turn for the worse, the stress and the dry air conspiring against his lungs. He would sit for hours, his coughing fits growing more violent, his eyes filled with a desperate fear for me. I began taking long walks at dusk, seeking refuge in the vast emptiness of the desert, the only place where I didn't feel judged. It was on one of these walks, near an old mission ruin, that Taza found me. He moved so silently, he was simply there, as if he had materialized from the evening shadows. "The town is turning against you," he stated. It wasn't a question. "They are afraid," I said, not looking at him. and Silas Kane is feeding their fear. Kane is a snake who sheds his skin to fit the season, Taza said. I know his kind. He uses fear like a cattle prod. He was quiet for a moment. My people are grateful. They ask about you. The boy Chato is strong again. He tells everyone the white medicine woman has magic. I allowed myself a small smile. There's no magic, only science and luck. To them they are the same thing, he replied. You should not be here. It is not safe. Nowhere is safe. I shot back the frustration of the past weeks boiling over. In Boston, I was suffocating in a gilded cage. Here I'm a pariah. It seems a woman's only choices are which prison she'll accept. He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached out not to touch me, but his hand hovered in the air near my arm, a gesture of aborted comfort. There is another choice, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But it is a hard path. A path between the worlds. Our clandestine meetings became my only solace. We would meet at the ruins or by a hidden spring deep in a rocky arroyo. He told me of the Apache ways of the spirits of the mountain and the wisdom of the coyote. I told him of Boston, of symphonies and museums of a world so alien to him, it might as well have been on the moon. We were two lonely souls, each an exile in our own way, finding a temporary home in the space between us. But we were not as secret as we believed. One evening as I rode back to town, Frank Kane's foreman and two other ranch hands blocked the trail. Evening, Miss Winthrop. Frank sneered, his tobacco-stained teeth yellow in the moonlight. Taking a ride, or were you out visiting your red-skin beau? My heart hammered against my ribs. Let me pass. Mr. Kane doesn't like you wandering so far from home, he said, grabbing my horse's bridle. He's a jealous man, and he especially doesn't like his property being sniffed around by some reservation dog. Suddenly, a voice cut through the darkness, low and lethal. Let her go. Taza stepped from behind a cluster of boulders. He held a long-bladed knife, and in the moonlight he looked like a vengeful spirit risen from the earth. The three ranch hands who were brave enough with whiskey in their bellies and an unarmed woman before them froze. Their bluster evaporated in the face of the silent, deadly giant. This ain't your business, Apache, Frank stammered, his hand inching towards his pistol. She is my business, Taza said, each word a chip of ice. Touch her again and your boss will be short a foreman. The menace in his voice was absolute. Frank and his men exchanged nervous glances, then slowly backed away, melting into the night. Taza turned to me, his face a grim mask. The danger had passed, but a new, more complicated tension hung between us. He will not stop, Taza said. Kane will see this as a challenge. He will try to destroy me to possess you. What can we do? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a storm of conflict, a battle between his protective instincts and the harsh reality of his world. For now, he said, you must be brave, and I must be wise. He escorted me to the edge of town, a silent guardian in the darkness. But we both knew this was just the beginning. Silas Kane had been defied. He was a man who never forgave a slight, and he had just been given the perfect excuse to unleash all his hatred. He would no longer try to buy me with flowers. He would try to win me with blood. Silas Kane's retaliation was not swift and bloody, but slow and cruel, like a poison. He started by choking our supplies. The freight company, which he conveniently owned a majority stake in, suddenly had trouble delivering my father's medical orders from back east. Elias Schmidt's general store was perpetually out of stock of the things we needed most. Kane was isolating us, trying to starve us out, to make life so unbearable that his offer of marriage would seem like a salvation. My father grew weaker. The stress gnawed at him, and his coughing fits left him breathless and pale. He watched me with haunted eyes, torn between pride in my defiance and terror for my future. "He will break us, Clara," he whispered one night, his voice a ragged sigh. "He will not," I vowed, though my own resolve was fraying. The weight of it all became unbearable. The town's scorn, my father's decline, Cain's ever-present threat. My secret meetings with Taza were the only moments I could breathe. They were a dangerous balm for my soul. One night the air was thick with the promise of a storm. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind moaned through the canyons. I met Taza at our usual spot by the mission ruins. He was more tense than I had ever seen him, his usual stoic calm replaced by a restless energy. "Cain is moving against my people," he said without preamble. "He's accused us of rustling his cattle. It's a lie, a pretext. Sheriff Brody has a warrant to search our camp. They'll use it as an excuse to—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "To kill us," Taza finished for me, his voice flat. "To clear the land. It is an old story. The white man wants the land, so he creates a monster to slay. This time I am the monster." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. "You have to run. Take your people and go north." "Run where?" he asked, a bitter edge to his voice. "This is our home. These mountains have been the home of my ancestors for 1,000 years. There is nowhere left to run. Soon there will be an ocean on every side." He turned to face me, the rising wind whipping his long hair across his face. "I will not run. We will fight, and we will die on the land that is ours." The finality in his voice terrified me. This wasn't a problem I could solve with medicine or logic. This was a clash of worlds, and he was standing on the fault line. "There has to be another way," I pleaded, stepping closer to him. "Don't do this. Don't let him make you a martyr." "It is better to be a martyr for your people than a dog in a cage," he said fiercely. Then his expression softened, the anger in his eyes replaced by a profound sadness. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if he were trying to memorize my face. "Clara Winthrop," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that was nearly lost in the wind. "From the first moment I saw you with blood on your hands, and no fear in your eyes, I saw your spirit. You do not belong in his world of cages." He reached out and gently touched my cheek. His hand was rough and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly tender. It sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "I have walked a lonely path," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "I have read your people's books about love. I thought it was just a word, a pretty lie told in a language I understood but could not feel. I was wrong." Tears pricked my eyes as the storm inside me finally broke. All the fear, the frustration, the loneliness, and this new, terrifying, wonderful emotion coalesced into a single aching point in my chest. "Taza," I whispered, my voice choked. He moved closer, his towering frame shielding me from the wind. His dark eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw a raw, heart-breaking vulnerability. He was a man of deep silences and few words, but the words he chose now were weighted with the power of a lifetime of unspoken feelings. "My life may be short," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Tomorrow I may be a ghost that haunts these mountains. I have nothing to offer you, no fine house, no safety, no future that is not stained with blood. But I will say this here, in this moment." He leaned in his forehead, resting against mine. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and alive. "I want to be the first man you kiss," he whispered, his voice trembling with the force of his own declaration, "and the last man you love." The world seemed to stop. The wind died. The impending storm held its breath. It was the most beautiful, most tragic, most profound thing anyone had ever said to me. It was a promise and a eulogy all at once. It asked for everything and offered nothing but the absolute truth of his heart. I didn't answer with words. I rose on my toes, looped my arms around his strong neck, and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, a collision of two worlds, fueled by borrowed time and the certainty of loss. It tasted of the desert of dust and wind, and a deep, aching sorrow. It was a kiss of firsts and lasts, of hellos and goodbyes. In that one moment, I wasn't the doctor's daughter from Boston, and he wasn't the feared Apache warrior. We were just a man and a woman, clinging to each other on the edge of an abyss, finding a fleeting, perfect eternity in the heart of a storm. When we finally broke apart, breathless and shaking, the first drops of rain began to fall cold as tears against our hot skin. He said nothing more. He simply gave my hand a final desperate squeeze, turned and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the taste of his kiss on my lips. He wanted to be the first and the last, and in that moment I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that he would be. The storm that broke that night was biblical, a furious deluge of rain and lightning that turned the streets of Redemption Gulch into rivers of mud. It felt like the sky was weeping for what was to come. The next morning, Sheriff Brody, flanked by a dozen deputized men, all of them on Silas Kane's payroll, rode out towards the dragoons. Their faces were grim, their rifles held with a self-righteous certainty. They were not going to serve a warrant. They were going on a hunt. I was frantic. I paced the floor of our small house, my father watching me with pained eyes. I had to do something. The image of Taza's face, the feel of his kiss, was burned into my mind. I couldn't let him die because of a lie. My first thought was to confront Kane directly, but I knew it was useless. He held all the cards. I needed proof. I needed to unravel the lie he had so carefully woven. The charge was cattle rustling. Kane claimed a dozen head had been driven off his northern pasture, the tracks leading straight towards the mountains. It was too neat, too perfect. I put on my riding clothes, my mind racing. Where would the proof be? Kane wasn't a man who did his own dirty work. He would have used his men like Frank, but they would be loyal. I needed someone else, someone on the inside, but with a conscience. My mind snagged on a name, Deputy Miller. Robert Miller was a young man, barely 20, who had come west seeking adventure and found only the dull reality of a corrupt town. I had set his arm once after a saloon brawl. He was quiet, watchful, and I had seen a flicker of shame in his eyes more than once when Sheriff Brody issued orders that clearly came straight from Kane. He was the weak link. I found him at the stables checking the shoes on his horse. He looked tired and conflicted. "Deputy," I said, my voice low and urgent. He looked up, startled. "Miss Winthrop, you shouldn't be here." "I know what Kane is doing," I said, cutting to the chase. "And I think you do too. Those cattle weren't rustled by Taza." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have my orders." "Orders to kill innocent people." I pressed, stepping closer. "I know you're not like the others, Robert. You have a conscience. That cattle trail, it wouldn't just disappear. The storm would have washed it away, but before that, where did the cattle go?" He remained silent, his face a mask of conflict. "Silas Kane is a monster," I whispered. But he's a clever monster. He wouldn't just kill the cattle to fake a crime. That's a waste of money. He would have moved them, hidden them somewhere. Am I wrong? He finally met my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw the truth. He was trapped. Even if I knew, he said, his voice barely audible, telling you would be a death sentence. Kane owns this town. Is your silence worth the lives of women and children? I asked. Because that's who Brody's posse will find in that canyon. Taza won't let them take him without a fight, and everyone will pay the price. He wavered. I saw it. I pushed one last time. Help me, Robert. Help me find the truth. He let out a long, shaky breath. There's an old, abandoned box canyon north of here. He said so quietly, I had to lean in to hear. They call it Devil's Jaw. Kane uses it sometimes, to hold stock off the books. Frank and a couple of others drove a small herd up there 2 nights ago, just before the storm. It was the key, the proof. Thank you, I said, my heart soaring with a dangerous hope. But as I turned to leave, a new voice, oily and triumphant, stopped me cold. Well, what do we have here? A conspiracy. Silas Kane stepped out of the shadows of the stables, a predatory smile on his face. Behind him stood Frank and another of his thugs. Deputy Miller went pale, his face a picture of pure terror. It seems my deputy has a loose tongue. Kane purred his eyes, fixed on Miller. And my intended has a penchant for meddling. He took a step towards me. Did you really think it would be that easy, Clara, that you could unravel my plans with a few well-chosen words to a spineless boy? My blood ran cold. He had heard everything. Frank Kane said, without looking away from me, "It appears Deputy Miller has had a tragic accident. Resisted arrest while colluding with savages. A terrible loss for the town." He then turned his chilling smile back to me. "And as for you, my dear, you're coming with me. We're going for a ride. I think it's time you saw what happens to those who defy me. You'll have a front row seat for the extermination." Frank drew his pistol and clubbed Deputy Miller across the head. The young man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Before I could scream, Kane's other man grabbed me, his hand clamping over my mouth. "Don't fight it, Clara," Kane said, his voice a venomous whisper in my ear. "The game is over. I've won." As they dragged me towards a horse, my mind reeled. This wasn't just a frame-up. It was a purge, and Kane wasn't just going to destroy Taza. He was going to make me watch. But as I looked at Kane's triumphant face, a sudden terrible realization dawned on me, a twist more horrifying than I could have imagined. I remembered Taza's story about the raid that killed his family. It had happened 15 years ago, not far from here. It was what had driven the last of the Apache from the fertile lands in the valley, the very same valley that now formed the heart of Silas Kane's ranching empire. It wasn't just about cattle. It was never just about me. This was the final act of a crime that had begun a generation ago. Kane wasn't just getting rid of a rival. He was silencing the last living witness to his own bloody rise to power. The serpent wasn't just striking. He was devouring the last piece of his own tail. The ride to Devil's Jaw was a nightmare. I was tied and slung over a horse, with Kane riding beside me, pontificating like a king surveying his domain. He was drunk on his own power, the victory so close he could taste it. And in his arrogance, he confessed everything. "It was a masterstroke, you know," he said, his voice gloating. 15 years ago. Everyone thought it was just another Indian raid gone wrong. A settler family the Stantons wiped out. Tragic. But nobody asked who really benefited. He paused, looking at me for effect. That land had the only year-round spring in the valley. The Apaches knew it. The Stantons knew it. And I knew it. So I paid a few gunslingers, gave them some cheap whiskey and a good story. They did the rest. The army came, drove the last of the Apache into the mountains, and I bravely claimed the abandoned land. The foundation of my entire enterprise built on a lie and a little bit of blood. The raid that orphaned Taza. I breathed the horror of it settling in my bones. Cain laughed. That's the part I didn't count on. One of them got away, a boy. Heard he was taken in by some priest. I never thought he'd be foolish enough to come back. When he showed up a year ago, silent and brooding, I knew. He didn't know I was responsible, of course, but his very existence was a loose end, and Silas Cain doesn't leave loose ends. His confession was chilling in its nonchalance. He had orchestrated the murder of Taza's family, stolen his ancestral lands, and was now about to finish the job by slaughtering Taza's people. My presence was just the convenient excuse he needed. We reached Devil's Jaw. It was a narrow, desolate canyon, and just as Miller had said, a dozen head of cattle with Cain's brand were penned at the far end. This was the proof. But the proof was useless if we were all dead. Cain's plan was simple and brutal. He would leave me here, tied up with the cattle. Frank and his other man would ride to join the posse, claiming they had found the rustled herd and that the Apache had taken me hostage. The posse, inflamed and righteous, would storm Taza's camp with no questions asked. In the ensuing battle, Taza would be killed, his people scattered or slain, and I would be rescued by a grieving but heroic Silas Cain. He would be the hero who had saved the town and the woman he loved. As his men tied my hands to a scrub oak, Cain leaned in close. You see, Clara, you will be mine. One way or another, you'll learn to forget him. You'll learn to appreciate what I've done for you. He mounted his horse and rode off with his men, leaving me alone in the silent, imposing canyon. The silence was my only hope. Sheriff Brody's posse was still miles away, moving slowly through the rough terrain. Cain and his men were riding to meet them, but they had left one person out of their calculations, Deputy Miller. I struggled against the ropes, my wrists already raw. It was hopeless. Panic began to set in, and then I heard it. A single soft bird call. It was repeated twice. It was a signal Taza had taught me, the call of a canyon wren. My heart leapt. I replied with the answering call, a pathetic, wavering sound. A moment later, he dropped from a ledge above me, as silently as a mountain lion. Taza. His face was a thundercloud of fury and concern. He sliced through my ropes with a single fluid motion of his knife. I followed you, he said, his voice a low growl. I saw them take you. Taza, it's a trap, I said, rubbing my wrists. The cattle are here. This is his proof. But there's more, so much more. I quickly told him everything Cain had confessed, the raid, his family, the stolen land. As I spoke, his face transformed. The fury was replaced by a chilling, absolute, to a terrible resolve. He was no longer just fighting for his people. He was fighting for the ghosts of his past. He will not reach the posse, Taza said. His voice was devoid of emotion, which was more terrifying than any shout. This ends today. Here. He pointed to the narrow entrance of the canyon. Their path back to the posse will bring them through here again. This is where we make our stand. I asked. You are part of this now, Clara Winthrop, he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was no backing out. What followed was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Taza was not just a warrior, he was a tactician. He knew every rock, every shadow of this canyon. He had me help him roll boulders to the edge of the canyon walls, creating a potential rock slide. He found a narrow crevice for me to hide in, handing me the canteen of water from his own belt. "Do not make a sound until it is over," he commanded. He then disappeared, melting into the rocks. The canyon was silent again, but now it was a silence that hummed with deadly intent. An hour later, Kane and his 2 men rode back into the canyon's entrance laughing. They were on their way to deliver the false news to the posse. They rode with the arrogance of men who believe they have already won. They never saw it coming. An arrow fired from an impossible angle high on the canyon wall took Frank's horse in the neck. The animal screamed and went down, throwing Frank to the ground. Before the others could react, Taza dropped from a ledge behind them, landing as silently as a shadow. He dispatched the second man with a brutal efficiency, his knife a blur of motion. The man was dead before he hit the ground. Kane, his face a mask of shock and terror, fumbled for his pistol. He fired a wild shot that ricocheted off the canyon wall, but Taza was already moving, weaving through the rocks like a phantom. Kane fired again and again. Then Taza let out a cry. It was not a scream of pain, but a raw, primal war cry that echoed off the stone walls, a sound filled with the grief and rage of 15 years. He charged. He ignored the pistol in Kane's hand, closing the distance in 3 massive strides. He slammed into Kane, and the 2 men went down in a heap. It was not a fight. It was an execution. Taza, fueled by a righteous fury, was an unstoppable force of nature. He avenged his mother, his father, his people with his bare hands. When it was over, Taza stood breathing heavily, his body splattered with blood. He looked down at the man who had stolen his past and tried to steal his future. Then he looked up at the rocks, his gaze finding my hiding place. The echoes of the gunshots faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. The reckoning was complete. But a new problem was bearing down on us. Sheriff Brody and a dozen armed men who had heard the shots were now riding hard in our direction. The thunder of approaching hooves grew louder, a drumbeat of impending doom. Taza stood over Kane's body, not as a victor, but as a man burdened by the violent catharsis he had just unleashed. "They're coming," I said, scrambling down from my hiding place. "They'll see this, and they won't ask questions. They'll kill you." He looked at me, his eyes dark with the horrors he had just committed and the injustices he had suffered. The fire of vengeance had cooled, leaving an exhausted, weary man. "Go," he said, his voice raspy. "Tell them Kane kidnapped you. Tell them I did this and fled. They will hunt me, but you will be safe." "No," I said, my voice resolute. I walked over to where Frank's pistol lay in the dust and picked it up. The metal was heavy and cold. "I am not leaving you. We end this together with the truth." Just then, another figure appeared at the canyon entrance. It was Deputy Miller, his head bandaged with a strip of his own shirt, his face bruised but determined. He held a rifle in his hands. "Miss Winthrop," he said, panting. I heard the shots." His eyes widened as he took in the carnage. "Miller, thank God," I said quickly. "Kane confessed everything. He killed Taza's family 15 years ago for this land. He framed him for the rustling. These cattle are the proof. He was going to have the posse slaughter Taza's people." Miller looked from me to Taza, then to the bodies. The pieces clicked into place behind his fearful eyes. He had a choice: side with the dead devil he knew, or the living truth he feared. "The posse is minutes away," Miller said, his voice shaking. "They'll shoot first and ask questions never." "Then we must give them a reason to ask," Taza said. He walked over to the penned cattle and with a powerful slash of his knife cut the ropes of the makeshift gate. He slapped the nearest steer on its rump, and the small herd, spooked and confused, began to thunder out of the canyon. "What are you doing?" I cried. creating confusion," he said. He grabbed my arm. "Miller, tell them the truth. You are their law now. Your word against a dead man's." He looked at the young deputy not with a threat, but with an appeal. "Be the man you wanted to be when you pinned on that star." Without waiting for an answer, Taza pulled me towards the back of the canyon, where the walls were steep but climbable for a man like him. Just as Sheriff Brody and the posse galloped into the canyon's entrance, they were met with the stampeding cattle. The ensuing chaos of shouting men and panicked horses gave us the cover we needed. Taza practically threw me up the first series of ledges, his strength astonishing. We scrambled up the rock face, my lungs burning my fingers raw. Below I could hear Brody restoring order, his voice bellowing questions. I heard Deputy Miller's voice, high-pitched but clear, trying to explain. We reached a high, narrow ledge, looking down on the scene below. We were exposed. A rifle shot pinged off the rock near my head. They had seen us. "They won't stop hunting me," Taza said, pulling me behind a rocky outcrop. "As long as I am here, your life will be in danger. You must go back down. Tell Miller's story. With Kane dead, they might listen." "And what will you do?" I asked, my heart breaking. He looked out at the vast, unforgiving wilderness that stretched to the horizon. "I will do what my people have always done. I will survive." He turned to me and cupped my face in his hands. His hands were stained with dirt and blood, but his touch was as gentle as it had been by the mission ruins. "He is dead, Clara," he whispered. "The ghost that haunted me is gone. But his world remains, and in his world there is no place for us." "We can make a place," I insisted, tears streaming down my face. "We can go north to Canada or west to California. Somewhere they don't know us." A sad smile touched his lips. "Your heart is brave, but the world is large, and its memory is long. A white woman and an Apache warrior. We would be hunted for sport." He leaned in and kissed me. It was not like the first time, not desperate and frantic. This was a kiss of deep, profound love and unbearable sorrow. It was a kiss that sealed a promise and acknowledged a bitter truth. It was a kiss goodbye. "You said you wanted to be the first man I kissed." I sobbed against his chest. He held me tight, his chin resting on the top of my head. "And the last man you love." He finished, his voice thick with emotion. "Letting you go is my proof of that. Your life is worth more than my happiness." Another shot rang out closer this time. "Go," he urged, gently pushing me away. "Live, Clara Winthrop. Live a long life. Live enough for both of us." He gave me one last searing look, a look that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. Then he turned and began to climb, moving up the sheer rock face with an agility that defied belief. He didn't look back. I stood on that ledge, watching him go, until he was just a speck against the infinite sky, a giant swallowed by the vastness of his own land. Below, the shouting had stopped. Deputy Miller had convinced them to hold their fire. I made my choice. I took a deep breath and began my slow, careful climb back down, back to the world of men, leaving my heart on a mountain ledge with the last man I would ever truly love. And so the official story was written. Deputy Robert Miller, a hero, uncovered Silas Kane's treachery. Kane resisted arrest and was killed. The Apache Taza, accused of kidnapping me, had fled into the mountains a fugitive from a justice he didn't trust. I corroborated the story. My father and I left Redemption Gulch a month later, seeking a gentler climate in California. But that's just the story they tell. The real story, the one I've shared with you, lives on not in history books, but in the echoes of the heart. The story of Taza and Clara is a testament to a love that dared to exist in a world determined to destroy it. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't about holding on, but about letting go. The Wild West was full of legends, but the truest stories are the ones whispered on the wind, stories of courage, sacrifice, and a love that was as vast and untamable as the land itself. If their story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of the forgotten West, and subscribe for more stories that bring history to life. What do you think happened to Taza? Let me know in the comments below.